you have to give an awful lot of yourself in this job. You know, I worked alone. The demands are extraordinary. They expect perfection every time. And there was a lot to do. They don't like a lot of people around. It's the way that I talk about it is it's like they want it to be magic. They want it to appear like there's nobody there. It just sort of happens. But that's you and all of your hard work and everything.
Welcome to the Private Chef Podcast, serving the 1%. I'm your host, Hannes Henche, and on our show we speak to the best chefs, how they honed in on their skills to excel in the industry, and what it takes to work as a private chef for some of the most exclusive clients in the world. Welcome back to the Private Chef Podcast. Today joining us from the beautiful Santa Cruz Mountains in California, Lisa Silverman.
Hello.
So, Lisa, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got started in the kitchen, or where does your love for culinary come from?
I often say that it kind of chose me. I didn't choose it. I just, from a very early age, demystified how complicated everything seemed. Like when I was very young, I made baklava. Everybody's like, oh my God, phyllo dough is the hardest thing to work with. And I was like, this isn't so hard. So I kind of demystified it and just felt free to explore and just cooked up a storm when I was a kid. And one thing just kind of led to another. And I went to undergraduate business school, and then I went to culinary and knew that I needed some business acumen for whatever road that was going to take. And I've been cooking ever since. I have many times tried to steer away from it. And that's why I say the universe keeps yanking me back in. It's like, no, this is what you're supposed to be doing. So here I am, lots of years later.
So what are the messages if you stir away? What are the messages to go back?
The messages that there becomes a point where you just sort of are working with the food, and it's more of you're exchanging yourself, an energy exchange with the food, and you just get absorbed in what you're doing. Now, I used to feel that way when I worked in restaurants, right? And you were just getting absolutely slammed on the line, and the whole world got so small. It was like just these little dupes. That's all you had to think about in front of you, nothing else. And you just, this sort of tunnel focus that I get when I'm really in a groove, it makes me happy. That's my happy place. I just sort of become
it sounds a bit like
very focused, very hyper-focused.
Describing a state of flow, right? Where the challenge meets your skill level, and at the same time, you're under pressure, so you're fully honed in.
I think that's a very astute way of putting it. It's being in the zone, like athletes talk about, I think, when you're really, you got to turn it out and something takes over in you. And because I've been doing it so long, it comes out pretty good.
You can back it up with the 10,000 hours rule, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
So what was your segue into the private industry?
I was living at a resort called St. Oars, way up on the north coast of California, in a little tiny town called Wallala, very near Sea Ranch. That's pretty famous. And I was a semi-recent grad from culinary school. I went to the California Culinary Academy in San Francisco and had worked in the wine country a bit. And ended up on the North Coast, and there was a job board that I was an alumni from the school, and for some reason, I'm living up in this little cabin, and I look at the job board, and there was a posting for a private chef in San Francisco. And I was sort of ready to move on, and I just decided to check it out. It was like, how am I ever going to get in one of these fabulous houses in San Francisco? So, right, I signed up to get an interview, and then you just start walking down the path. And you have one interview, with whoever is vetting people for the principals. And, and then I had a cooking interview, and then I met with the woman at the house, and it just went on. And before I knew it, I had the job. And anybody that knew me was like, how are you going to do that? There's no way you can do that job. But I figured it out. It was very different than anything I'd ever done. Certainly restaurant work, as you know, it's, there's nothing like it. So I immersed myself in there weren't many private chefs back when I started. This was, 25, 30 years ago, very prominent family in San Francisco. And there's the last part of this street called Broadway. And it was probably the bulk of the chefs that were working privately at that point were all around there. Yep. I don't know, it was like this small little club, and they helped me a lot. And I moved into this mansion from the North Coast, literally, where there was like this little cabin. I moved into I had a whole floor of this mansion in Pacific Heights with like the same view that they had out of their, I had a whole floor. It was down low, but I had a whole floor. So that my introduction was big. Something. It was a full immersion. And that is the only time I've lived in. It was like I said, there weren't a lot of situations like that. So literally, these houses have servants' quarters, right? They're sort of built in, and you can call yourself a private chef, you can call yourself a servant, but that's where I moved in a couple of times. Like they had multiple residences around the Bay Area, and so there was always a little place for the help.
Yeah.
Which is good.
How many years did you stay with
was, I think 3.5. 3.5. What I discovered, and I don't know that I would say it's probably still true today, is there's some people that do it for their whole careers. We call it like lifers. Like they get in with one family or, in with whatever, but it becomes the rest of their life. And I was very young at the time. And I knew I wasn't going to be a lifer, that this was very interesting, but that there were other things I wanted to explore. And it's a hard balance, you have to give an awful lot of yourself in this job. I worked alone. The demands are extraordinary. They expect perfection every time. And there was a lot to do. They don't like a lot of people around. The way that I talk about it is, it's like they want it to be magic. They want it to appear like there's nobody there. It just sort of happens. But that's you and all of your hard work and everything. And that sort of dance has been very difficult for me to try and put as much of myself into what I'm doing and gift that to the people I'm working for and execute it. And then for your job to disappear. It's always been this really weird thing, but that's the demands of the job. And I think that's fairly universal. Not everybody feels that way. I certainly know people that are invited to sit down at the table when they're finished. But that has not been my experience ever. There's always been quite the distance between.
I think the sitting down at the table, at least in my experience, it was more so around single gig parties, never or less so when I was full-time engaged with a particular family, but a lot more so if I would like maybe have a certain party that I cooked for, or maybe just the weekend, and then there would be like a moment where like, hey, come have a seat at the table, you know, let's chat a little bit. But that usually didn't really happen in like the long-term engagement where you're supposed to be like the, you know, probably closer to the wallpaper.
That was my introduction into it. So that's sort of, that was the model that I was brought up in. And it has been much less casual since. I really thought I was done with it very early on, and I thought it was fascinating. I learned so much. I was able to hone my style of cooking with all that sort of freedom. And I mean, one of the best things about private chef, for them, at least in my experience, is there's no food cost. Like the people that I've worked for, your job is to go get the very best there is to offer out there and bring it back and work with it. And I find that very exciting. Instead of trying to constantly think through what the cost is going to be and, you know, all the stuff that goes along with running a different kind of kitchen. This is a very free experience, and especially very early on, I was treated like royalty when I would walk into these little markets, you know, around Pacific Heights. I called the shots. It's like whatever I wanted. If I needed to go in the walk-in. Yeah. Or, you know, we had accounts, and, you know, I would walk from the mansion and go to the little market with my dog, and then we'd leave and they would bring the groceries to the house for us. I wouldn't even have to carry them. So I'd walk home, and I mean, this was a good long time ago. I certainly haven't had an experience like that since, but yeah, there's a lot of schlepping that goes on usually, I would have to say.
The good old days, huh?
Yeah, it was pretty golden back in the day. It was, I'm dating myself, but there weren't a lot of private chefs then. And it was sort of a very, people were fascinated with the concept, which I guess is why we're talking now, because it's an interesting take on the culinary profession.
I think people are still very fascinated by it because while there might be more wealthy people and more private chefs now, I think it's still, compared to maybe the global landscape of chefs and people there, it's very minuscule. You know, it's like it's still a small chunk of the industries in the world, and a small chunk of chefs that have exposure to this.
The 1%.
Yeah, actually, the other day I was speaking to David, and he said it's more like the 100th of the 1%. It's like people at that level, you know, it's like beyond the 1%.
It's really fascinating because I mean, I'm very, you know, I think I'm technically in the Silicon Valley, but there's a lot of very new, very large tech money down here. And I have interviewed for positions where there'll be like a family with 2 kids and they have 3 chefs. 3. Have you ever heard of that? You have?
The other day I was speaking to someone, and they have 4 chefs because they want full-time coverage, and it's a couple of 2. And I'm like, that's insane.
Yeah,
that's like you
full coverage.
you have your own hotel going on or something. Like, so yeah, I think the way they do it is they have 16 hours a day of coverage. So anywhere between probably 6 a.m.
every
to 10
day of the
p.m.
year.
And probably if they wanted to, probably also at 2 a.m. But
Somebody's
then the chefs
call.
rotate so that everybody has some committed days off. But I was like, well, that's next level.
Yeah, that has been astonishing to me, sort of the more modern setups where there is a chief of staff at the house and they run a full crew of people to, and sometimes that's per property that they have a chief of staff. And sometimes you're, going between
Yeah.
households. That's all very, specific job related, what the travel situation is. So
I've seen some of
that's
the
the opposite of what I'm
job
talking about.
posts. It's nothing. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I've been more in the, I've never been part of such a big team. And actually, talking about it, I was speaking to one of the agencies based out of London, and they're bringing a lot of the European chefs to the Emirates. And they said that over there, it's even more so. Like, if you become a private chef there, they run their estates more like maybe a resort hotel. Like, you might be the 10th or 15th or 20th chef in the compound, or maybe even more. And that's like,
it really.
and I think some of that we're seeing in the West now too, where there's like serious money, and maybe in California, a lot of it comes from technology, where they're operating their estates almost like a hotel or a resort, where there's constantly guests, where there's constant entertainment, and where there's always everything needs to be available.
That was one of the things that they were looking for in one of these large staffs. Was they had just bought a house. It wasn't a residence. It was just a place to entertain and put people up. And they were looking for somebody to do the whole thing, to be available to cook and to anticipate any kind of guest needs, whatever, whenever, however. It is totally like a resort now. And that was just what this house was about, nothing else. Then they had multiple.
Yeah.
They
have multiple.
It's excessive. And no, it's just that kind of excess. I sort of, it's hard to be around and hard to be part of. You get paid extremely well. And it's very sexy and seductive, but it's really hard to put all of your judgment about all of that aside and really, those jobs are hard regardless of how many people are around, and the expectations are huge when you're getting paid that kind of money. And you got to check it at the door just like any other profession. And sometimes that's hard when it's so excessive. It just, having your needs taken care of is one thing, but having a staff of 15 for 2 people, that's a whole nother level, like you said.
Yeah. There's also one of the things I noticed, that the more seductive the pay seems, the higher the standards, or the more red flags are usually involved in the role.
Yep. There are plenty of, that's the whole thing about the job. It is dependent on the principles and the structure around them, and your own personal style and how they match up. If it's going to be because I think it can be a very symbiotic, really good relationship. But I think it really has to do with gratitude and respect. And not everybody with money has it. And there's a way to treat people like professionals and to be grateful for that stuff. Not excessively, but it just makes such a difference in any job you have, not to only hear negative things. And so once I had some experience with some really positive feedback all the time, it's like, oh, this is great. It has a big impact on the job. I'm just speaking for personal experience. I've done, 5 or 6 different gigs with different kinds of people. My favorite is part-time. part-time private chefing is the best. I would like to, to be doing that.
You always appreciate it.
I mean, it's the perfect mix. Yeah. And, part of it is you have to get very enmeshed in the family, because if you're very good at this job, you can anticipate, your job is to anticipate what they want and need before they think of it. And you got to know them pretty well in order to do that. And so there was a nice sort of, I wasn't that involved when I was working part-time. I knew enough to do that without knowing all the drama and all the rest, and getting, becoming part of the household. It felt much more, I don't know what a good word is. It worked. It worked really well. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. So what would you say are some of the downsides? You just mentioned that maybe becoming too close, or what are some of the downsides to the job for someone who's coming in new?
I think I've identified some personal ones for myself. It's really hard to talk globally. I liked what you said about red flags and paying attention to, these jobs are not always what they appear, and to get as much information as you possibly can from however you can, from other staff members, from whoever you're replacing. It is certainly not for everybody. It's a very particular thing, and it is. It's a very interesting. You see things and are exposed to things that you otherwise wouldn't be, in terms of, from something as simple as setting the most elegant table. There's a part of that I absolutely adore. They have the most beautiful silver and china and handmade Lalique glasses. And I don't know. Those are more of the upsides, not the downsides. The downside is that after you've worked 15 hours, you have to hand wash the Lalique glasses and not break them, because they're worth about $12,000 each. That's a downside that you wouldn't think about. How's that? There can be very long
I like
days.
that one. This actually,
and
sometimes I would try to avoid taking the more expensive plates just because of that reason. I'm like, oh, the housekeeper won't be able to help me later. I don't want to hand wash those. I'll take the other plates.
Yeah, those are things you would never think about if you were just starting out in the industry. You learn a lot of things that you just wouldn't otherwise be exposed to, right? I helped out in the Getty household for a while. I wasn't part of the staff there, but I would assist from time to time because I knew people. And really, some of the extraordinary artwork, I mean, it's like working in a museum. The people that I used to work for when I first started out are major contributors to the museum here. And so I go to the Museum of Modern Art now here, and I see the stuff from the living room that they've now donated. That kind of stuff is just, that doesn't happen when you work in restaurants. Some of it is really, the good stuff is going to have to get you through the bad stuff. It's a balance of, it's really interesting, and you can't make that kind of money. It's the only way to make a living wage these days. Not necessarily, I would say, outside of the restaurant. I mean, there's new and unique ways to work in the culinary industry all the time. Podcasts, for example. But in terms of doing the cooking and all that kind of stuff, it's
I haven't figured out how to make any money on podcasts yet.
People are working on it. Just in the way of information. I don't know. Do you ever listen to Andrew Talks to Chefs?
No.
Have you heard that podcast? You should check that out. It's interesting.
No, I got to figure.
It's not.
Andrew talks to chefs.
Yeah, very interesting. Not totally geared towards private chefs, but all about chefs. And he speaks our language. He's not a chef, but he's been writing about them. And I sound like an ad for his podcast. But anyway, check it out. It's it's interesting. And he's been doing it a really long time. Yeah, totally. Now I'll have to plug yours.
So I
don't know that he has a lot of private. Yeah, exactly. I promise. I'm trying to think if I've ever heard him talk about private stuff. He does a lot of, big industry names, and is quite current. I don't know that I'm very current on the who's the hottest chef right now, but I do enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not super current on those lists. I'm kind of too busy. It's like keeping up with the Joneses in the chef world.
They changed. They changed so frequently.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting conversation, and I find that chefs that seek that kind of public recognition, you won't find them in our industry. Chefs that want to solely bring to the plate kind of what's their culinary expression. This industry doesn't suit them, at least not as a full-time position, because we're not here to express ourselves every day.
No, it's about articulating or executing what they want, not what you want.
Yes.
But it's also, it can be extremely lonely when you were talking about some of the downsides, because so much of cooking professionally is about sort of the camaraderie in the kitchen and all the stuff that goes on there, that it is a very different, everything. It's very cerebral. It's very, you're in your head, and it's a lot of work because, at least in my experience, I've been the only one. So I haven't had other people to delegate to unless we were really entertaining large. So there's a lot to do. I've done 3 meals a day, multiple courses for every, hors d'oeuvres. I mean, that's how it all started. It was like, I was moving and I had to get to the store in between meal periods. And, it's a full contact sport, as they say.
Yeah, talking about downsides, actually, I think sometimes the principals don't understand that in between the meals, you have to go shopping, and they change the menu on you after you went shopping, and you're just like scrambling it together, trying to get either back to the shop or send somebody to the shop, or just getting it together in whichever way you can, and. I think that's one of the things where when you're truly on your own, and let's say you're doing breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that can be a real challenge if somebody doesn't give you the runway with the menu commitments, for example. Or sometimes you even find yourself like, yeah, this has been confirmed, this is on the menu, but we just don't feel like it today. I'm like, okay, so I also have this and that. What else would you like? And then they obviously choose something that you don't have, and you still have to make it work.
Here's another downside. As you're talking about, the very last position that I had, the numbers would change radically. I'm not talking about we got an extra deuce coming over, right? It would be like there's 8 more people coming for dinner. And it happened all the time. I mean, they were pretty upfront that was part of the challenge of the job. But let me tell you about that when the numbers change and the quantity of food, or like you're saying, the whole food is wrong. But there are lots and lots of challenges that come up that, again, would not necessarily be top of mind if you were just sort of thinking about this as a profession. But it's like when people want to be a celebrity chef, they think it's all like that, but it's got nothing to do with that. that. It's very different when you get on the inside. It's a job.
Yeah. Yeah, and it actually requires a lot of work.
While you're, and they can never see you sweat, right? It all has to be, they want you extraordinarily calm and not stressed out. At least that's been my experience. Like your energy has to be like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine.
Yeah, that's the thing. It should look effortless no matter what's going on, but at times it feels more like it's actually a storm, but you have to look like the center of the storm.
Yep. That sounds very descriptive. You are the center of the storm.
Well, everything is whirling around you. So what have been some of the most fulfilling, maybe, engagements that you had where you felt it was like a really good fit? You mentioned that, after having an experience where you felt more acknowledged and there was more appreciation for your food, how did you find them? Or
yeah,
it sounds a bit more like a match.
I really enjoyed the part-time, but again, it's got downsides too, because I was also responsible for making sure the household was inventoried. I was the shopper and the errand runner kind of thing. And so I wasn't exclusively doing food then. It becomes, part of my day was making dinner and leaving it. They were very capable of taking care of themselves. They would, when they were ready to eat, they would eat, they'd put their dishes in the dishwasher, and everything else I would take care of when I came in the next morning. Now, that's pretty unusual, I think. In my experience, it's been you clean up afterwards and everything's clean before you go. You serve it, you clean up afterwards and then clean the dining room up and then you go home. So I've done it from a lot of different angles. But that was I loved that. I didn't love doing all the errands and picking up the dry cleaning and stuff. But as we talked about briefly, there's a lot of things that come up in your job that you're going to be asked to do that have nothing to do with your job description, your job title. They want you to have a can-do attitude, and stuff happens all the time, and they need you to pitch in, and that's got to be okay with you. So that might go in another downside part.
I think especially in the early stage, somebody who is just coming to the industry, in order to last, there needs to be a big can-do attitude. And at times that might lead to rather odd jobs or, tasks that have to be fulfilled. And
you can easily be taken advantage of because you don't say no to these people. And that puts you in some awkward positions sometimes. So that, especially for somebody just starting out, I mean, the boundaries are tough. It's tough to set up a clear boundary while still being can do. I'm here to do whatever.
Do you feel like, given that you're female, I'm just saying that because I did interview a lot of women who said that they felt that was more challenging for them than it might have been for a male counterpart who would have just been the chef maybe. And there were some points where it's like, hey, given that women know how to do a lot of more things in the household well, like for example, you mentioned setting the table or doing floral work, and that those areas for female are a lot more vague than maybe for the chef. And like, okay, the guy comes, all he knows is how to cook. Okay, maybe he knows how to clean the dishes, and that's about it, and we won't bother him.
Interesting. I never really thought about it that way. That's the fun stuff for me. I really like that stuff. So it wasn't a big imposition. I think, I think every household's different that way. I don't know if that's an expectation of, of every job, chef job that you are responsible. Often they have front of the house people, that either work when they entertain or however they're handling the front of the house. Cause again, just in my experience, you're not serving when they're entertaining. Now I've certainly been in a position where I've had to serve, small
Ideally,
dinner parties, but
ideally,
formal parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, yeah, it can get really hard to be out there serving the first course, and you can't be in the kitchen getting the second course ready, so it comes out right on time.
I mean,
You got to be good.
I've had
you got to be
events
good.
where, yeah, you got to be good. Where there was like a multi-course kind of dinner. At the same time, I was partially expected to take care of the beverages and having different beverages, and somebody would ask for a different drink or cocktail and different wines and stuff. At the same time, you're serving and you're supposed to cook the whole thing. And I'm like, do you think I'm a wizard? Or like, I didn't study culinary
Magic,
in Hogwarts,
like I was saying.
Yeah. I'm not Harry Potter's cousin.
Yeah, and don't look stressed out. Don't look stressed out while you're doing it, right? While you're doing 16 things all at the same time that you don't have time for because there's food on behind you. Yeah, can you look nice and calm about it and look like you're having a good time doing it?
One time it was a 4th of July, and it was a jam-packed day, and there were like guests and different events on different venues during the day, from like the yacht to the estate, and half of it wasn't planned. It was like on the fly, and the whole day I was like just going at it. There was no break, nothing whatsoever. And I remember then one of the end of the day we had like a formal kind of barbecue party, and I didn't get a chance to go purchase more meats during the day because we suddenly decided to go on a yacht. We also had supposed to bunch of food, and it was supposed to all a big setup that wasn't planned for, so I didn't get to go. And so I had just a bit of Wagyu beef for the night, and because I was running around serving at the same time, I lost the beef on the grill. It was I couldn't serve it anymore. And all that one person was focusing on is that I didn't serve the beef. And I'm like, didn't you see everything else I did today? Like that got completely ignored. And we fully honed in on the fact that the beef wasn't served. And that's those heart-wrenching moments sometimes. Yeah, it's crushing. You spend the entire day busting your butt, doing everything possible that you can, and out of everything that you've done well,
and then some.
Focusing on that one thing. Like you didn't want to eat the other five things of seafood or poultry
Proteins.
or five more different proteins and meats. There's like an entire thing going on, and like I'm sorry we don't have the Wagyu ribeye right now.
Yeah.
But those are some of the hard.
These are very descriptive examples. Yeah. And you got to keep going. Like that could happen, and you still got a full day ahead of you, right? They could crush you at breakfast.
Well, right. So, sometimes that happens. I also sometimes I love when they set a menu for you, and then they you come in already. You have all kinds of, and I'm like, oh, why are you here already? I'm like, well, this is the menu we've decided on, and I don't have anybody to help me. Like, this kind of got to get done at some point. So, I find that very funny
I
where
would
they
definitely
don't want you to
say
be there too much.
that's what I mean. It's like invisible, like it happens like magic, not like somebody's worked really, really, really hard. That you're right. That's why it's so crushing when they can find the one thing wrong, or this wasn't exactly perfect, because it does require so much of yourself. What I was going to say briefly before we were trying to talk about educating people, that unless you have a very good mind for organization, you might want to think twice about it. It is, organization is a big a part of the job as cooking, I think, unless you have a staff to work with or to delegate to. But my experience is it's been an awful lot to fill in a short period of time, and you have to be super well organized.
Yeah, even more so if you think about a position on a yacht where you only get to dock every other day or week, worst case. Like that I mean, that's something that I personally always turned down. I only had like day trips. I never wanted those long-term engagements because I was like, I appreciate that I have the last minute run to the supermarket or something if I have to. Like, I don't want to be out on the ocean for the whole
Yep.
week knowing that I'm running out of something.
Absolutely. Yeah, these are all the sort of really bizarre things that you wouldn't think about. It's like, yeah, I'm in the middle of the ocean. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
You have to be
but
good
also
at
being on an
improvising.
island, for example. Yeah, I'm not sure if you worked on any islands, but working on islands gets very interesting because, I mean, it's 70% of what you think is normal is just not available.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Supplies are, and they can't just be okay. They've got to be first class, the best of everything. So you can't just make do. Sometimes you have to, I guess, but that's not really, you really need to be finding quality ingredients because that's what their expectation is. Not just you're making a meal, you're making a special meal.
So what are some of the things that you really enjoyed? You already mentioned, you see kind of extraordinary circumstances, places, you get to deal, for example, with setting these beautiful tables with extraordinary pieces of a lot of, I mean, it's also art in itself, plates that we're using, the silverware that is a lot of handmade. What else do you enjoy about being a private chef?
Many times there's been a garden involved that you can work with a gardener if they have, or you just they just live at a different level than everybody else, and sort of getting exposed to what that is and looks like and is fascinating. It's there you just get to be around people that you never would, who they entertain, how they entertain. It's an extraordinary world, and it's fascinating to get a peek into it and to be living in it, not just a peek. I've enjoyed meeting other private chefs. It is a very solitary endeavor a lot of times, and I really enjoyed meeting other people that were doing it and can relate to what you're doing, because it is it's bizarre. There's no other job that's exactly like that, where you have to be that intimate with people and yet not be at all. It's a very it takes a special kind of person. And I think experience helps. I think once you do it for a while, I think you get better and better at it. I'd like to think anyway.
Well, I hope anybody that does something for a while gets better at it.
Well, you're not going to last very long if you're not doing it well. Here's another thing, the sort of immediate feedback. You know whether you satisfied your guests or not. There's no questions about that. And some people really like that. I enjoy knowing. It helps me figure it out, so I don't have to listen to the bad stuff. I want to get it right. So that feedback is very helpful, especially at the beginning. Like pretty much every day I'd be getting some kind of feedback or a little note somewhere, or, and which it can also be very annoying, especially if you don't take criticism well. But I found it pretty helpful to have that kind of contact with your guests
sometimes
that you just don't have in a restaurant or a hotel. Go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes it might be unqualified in a sense. Like I've certainly worked with people where I felt like the feedback kept changing, and it could be, for example, literally exactly the opposite of what I was told last week. It's a simple example, like steam the broccoli, and then fry the broccoli or something. And I'm like, well, you literally just told me to do it this way. And then like 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, it always keeps changing. I'm like, am I losing my mind or?
I think that's part of the dance, is living in that world of craziness, right? Because it's crazy. Like that's not how people live, right? And then you go home, right? And it's just like, whoa. Living in was fascinating. And then I really thought I was done. And then I went back to it sort of later in my career. I've done all kinds of different things. I've tried to hit this thing from every angle. But the private work is certainly the most lucrative because they can afford it. But I find that there's lots of other jobs that there's other well-paying jobs, but not like that. Not like that.
So from a chef's perspective, it sounds like you really looked at it, and I certainly did myself. What other categories of chef shops would you say are either close to or right behind being in the private sector?
Well, I was lucky enough to be the executive chef for Williams-Sonoma, which is headquartered here, and loved that job. That was I was the first one. So again, I was sort of setting up the whole thing, and I was hired by Chuck Williams, and the president of the company. They didn't want to do they didn't want to outsource it. Most of the corporations here are run by big, Guggenheim, Bon Appetit, and they do the food service at the corporations. But this was done in-house because we were Williams-Sonoma, and I loved that job. So, and I liked the corporate aspect of the Monday through Friday, no weekends. I mean, that part of working for corporations is kind of nice because so much of this hospitality business is about working your hardest when everybody else is off. And that can be very hard on yourself, your partners, your family. That's a big part of this business. And it's certainly no different in the private world.
I mean, I think that's why some of the people are attracted to. I mean, there's banks who, for the C-level, have really attractive culinary positions, where they have a very small, like almost restaurant
executive
kind of structure
team
for the C-level. Yeah, and those positions are out there, and I think what chefs do appreciate about it, that there is a certain regular structure to it. Where it's usually Monday to Friday. It's usually not late. It's like regular 9 to 5s kind of thing. You might come a little bit earlier. Maybe you're setting up breakfast for them and such things. But those positions are out there. But at the same time, they never quite intrigued me. Yeah, to some degree. I think for people that have family.
Yeah. Having those business hours is huge. If you're lucky enough to have a family in this business.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's a large chunk of chefs that probably make a cut with the industry when they start having a family.
Yep. If they're sane. Or they end up with another chef. That happens a lot.
Well, yeah, but given that they're chefs, I question their sanity from the gate. it takes a certain kind of person to become a chef, and then maybe a different level for the private sector.
Agreed.
In Germany, there is a study, and the life expectancy of a restaurant chef is, I think, as low as 58 years. And that goes to show about kind of the demands physically and mentally that the chef position or world brings with it. And I do think that working in the private sector is slightly different, and we can take care of ourselves slightly better probably compared to a restaurant. But nevertheless, I think it is something to look out for anybody, you know, and really making sure that the family or the principles that they work with aligns with maybe their personal values and how they want to live life, what they want to cook, you know. I think that always helped me to kind of try to find a better match.
I think the longevity in the position is completely based on the sort of synergy between you and the principals, or, you know, the whole team, whatever that team looks like.
Yeah. What has been your experience maybe with setting boundaries in an environment where you felt like that wasn't the case, but you had to maybe stand up for yourself, and what would successfully communicating that look like?
I don't know about the latter part of the question. And
that might just be quitting.
Or getting fired. I had an experience where I was recruited for a full-time position, and tried out for it and everything. And then all of a sudden it turned into a part-time position. This is different than the other one I was talking about, where I was getting all the gratitude. But all of a sudden it changed into 20 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week, and half as much pay as they were talking about. But I'd had this other experience working part-time, and I was like, love it. Great. I'm in. So I'll work part-time. And I ended up working 60 plus hours, right, on a regular basis. This was a job where, 10 more people are coming. And, you know, you just have to have so much stuff prepped and accessible to pull something like that off, right? You can't be starting from scratch. Do you know what I mean? That's part of the organization of dealing with somebody who changes the numbers on you all the time. And I was doing a good job. It was hard, and it was taking me a lot of hours. And I was going to wait for 6 months, and at about 5 months and a week, I couldn't take it anymore, and asked for a meeting. And they were absolutely loving me, and the job was fine. I was doing it was all fine. Everybody was happy. I just thought I would bring it to their attention, and they would absolutely want to remedy it, because it was so off. It wasn't like I'm working a little bit more than I thought I was going to. This was twice, and then twice again. It was crazy. And I brought it to their attention, and they let me go.
Whoa, that's tough.
And did it in a not a very nice way. Like, it wasn't that conversation. They wanted me to work the 2 week, they sort of gave me my 2 weeks notice, and then expected me to come in every day instead of just handing me a check and saying thank you. And you picked up on it sort of when we had our introductory comments. I have a little bit of a bitter taste in my mouth about some of this. But I also have had some very good experiences as well. But my latest was, has sort of left a very, I don't know. There's good people and there's bad people. And I ended up working for people that, the synergy wasn't there with us. So
100%. And I think that actually reflects the industry well, and money only amplifies who people are. And there's this kind of people and those kind of people. And I think all of the experience that you mentioned, they've been certainly part of my career. And I think there's nothing that can really protect somebody or shelter it from those experiences. You kind of have to go through it, unfortunately, for yourself to see those nuances maybe in the upcoming positions or families, or and then kind of decide for yourself
learning.
Once you're in those situations.
I'm absolutely still.
Yeah,
I'm still learning. Nope. There is an awful lot to learn. That's another, it's not boring.
Yeah. Well, that's life at large, It's a never-ending journey of learning.
Well, I think in compared to some of the restaurant work that we were talking about, there can be a lot of monotony in the menu and it forces you to be quite creative. Again, depending on who you're working for, but most of them are pretty well-traveled and expect a range of cuisines and high-level everything you're doing.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, Lisa, this has been very, very lovely. Thank you so much. It's always amazing to speak with fellow chefs,
You're
especially
so welcome.
given that you have so much experience in the industry. Yeah, and I don't know if anybody would like to get in touch with you. What's the best way to maybe reach out to you?
My brand is A Chef's Eye, like a chef's eyeball. So it's A Chef's EYE. My website's not up yet, but I'm working on it. So it's a chef's eye at gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions or field anything, really. And it's been just fabulous. I love talking about this stuff.
Thank you for joining us at the Private Chef podcast. If you know any highly skilled chefs that want to take their life to the next level, make sure to share this podcast with them. And if you enjoyed this episode, click subscribe and check out our upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening.